All right, we're live.
All right, sounds great. Hi, everyone. I wanted to talk today about the recent trends and changes in the EB-2 NIW. As you may know, this week USCIS released updates to its policy manual for the EB-2 National Interest Waiver. The updates are pretty significant in some ways, but in other ways, or in many ways, they're just outlining and putting into writing what we're already seeing with the NIW trends. So I don't know if any of you who follow me regularly are going to notice major changes. A lot of what I'm going to be talking about today is what we're already talking about with the trends. So I don't think anyone should panic by this update. This update definitely does restrict things. It's trying to narrow who can qualify and who should apply for NIW. But it is not making the category impossible for people who are truly doing important work in the US national interest. So with that in mind, I'm just going to talk through some of the changes. I guess before I do that, though, more generally, more broadly, I want to comment on the strategy behind this. Policy updates are signals to the public. So USCIS doesn't necessarily have to outline what its policies are. It outlines what the policies are when it wants to influence the public's actions in a certain way. So by publishing this update, USCIS is signaling that certain groups of people should file or certain groups of people should not file. In 2022, when the policy manual was updated by the Biden administration, it added a lot of information in about STEM professionals and how STEM US degrees would be highly preferenced. The signal through that policy manual was that those people should apply for NIW. Of course, the cases were always viable. It's not like the policy manual made this sweeping change. But since the public didn't know that those cases would be considered viable, the policy manual was the tool through which they learned about it. And so it was a signal that they should file. This most recent change in 2025, this most recent policy manual update, is, I think, in many ways signaling that companies should stop using the EB-2 NIW program for the majority of their workers, and that individuals are going to receive a lot more scrutiny on their proposed endeavors and on whether or not they can actually impact the US on par with national importance. So the signal is definitely that fewer people should now be applying. This makes sense because USCIS has received floods of applications in an increasing count over the last year or so. And keep in mind, with the incoming administration, with the Trump administration, historically Trump has put people into power in USCIS that have been very unfavorable for high-skilled immigration. And so if he does the same thing again and sees that is this flood of immigration applications coming through this highly discretionary NIW program, the backlash or the reaction is more likely to be extreme. So I do think that by the agency putting reasonable guidelines into place and limiting the program right now, before Trump takes office, is actually probably a good strategic move to stabilize the entire field. So don't panic about this update. It will, I think, impact some things for some of you. Maybe some of you will have now a longer journey to qualify for the EB-2 NIW. You may have to do some extra work to prove national importance. But again, it's not necessarily radically changing who's going to be considered. It's just tightening the program and making it so that they're focusing more on people who are making bigger impact in the U.S. All right, so some of the changes are pretty straightforward. USCIS is emphasizing that the EB-2 category is for members of the professions or people with exceptional ability. So typically, anyone with anyone with a master's degree that is a U.S. degree or equivalent to a U.S. degree could submit their EB-2, and it was almost assumed that they were a member of the professions. USCIS, though, from time to time has questioned this aspect in some cases, and I think this is going to be a new trend where they question this even more. There is a list of professions that's actually listed out in the INA. It's not very comprehensive. Engineers is on that list, so if you are a software engineer, you do qualify by virtue of being an engineer. But I think it's an odd list. Like, it doesn't necessarily encompass all of the things that people think about as professions. USCIS says that in order to be a member of the professions, the minimum entry to your occupation needs to be a bachelor's degree. And they're probably going to advance the interpretation that it's a bachelor's degree in a related field. So they usually say engineers need a related engineering degree, so that counts as a profession. Doctors need usually an advanced degree in medicine, that's a profession. USCIS, very interestingly though, says that nursing is not a profession and teaching is not a profession. And I think nurses and teachers would take great offense to this interpretation. This interpretation to me doesn't even make any sense because the Department of Labor's own surveys say that these are job zone 4 occupations and that they do normally require a bachelor's degree or equivalent. But USCIS in the H-1B and in other contexts has all kinds of convoluted memos that explain why these shouldn't be considered professions. I've gotten both nurses and teachers approved through the NIW program before, but I think that there's going to be lots more scrutiny on these, and it may be much less viable in the future. One other profession that I think is interesting is pilots. Like, pilot NIWs have been a big trend over the past few years. And it's not like tons and tons of pilots are getting approved through NIW. It's still a very niche profession, but it has been a pretty viable set of cases. I think it's an open question on whether or not USCIS is actually going to consider this to be a profession. Because it is, I don't remember if it's Job Zone 4 or Job Zone 5, but it is one of those where the Department of Labor says that a bachelor's degree is the normal minimum requirement. But the problem is most pilots that I know get a bachelor's degree in an unrelated field, in engineering or business, or something like that. And there aren't really piloting degrees in a lot of countries. So I think it's an open question on whether or not those will continue to be viable under the advanced degree category. The good news for those of you that can't qualify under advanced degree is that there is always the exceptional ability alternative. So many people who typically qualify for NIW, like important artists, entertainers, people without any formal education at all who are business owners, or who have done something really important in their field, they can still claim exceptional ability. They do not need to be a member of a profession. But USCIS has somewhat tightened the definition of exceptional ability and is emphasizing that you really need objective documentary evidence of those qualifications. All right, USCIS specifically updated the policy manual related to entrepreneurs. Entrepreneur cases have taken USCIS by storm, I think. There are so many people from abroad who have put together business plans and gone through immigration consultants, who have filed their NIW petitions with USCIS, I think kind of expecting almost automatic approval based on the strength of the business plan. USCIS is now saying that economic impact is an important factor that can be considered, but economic impact alone will not allow an entrepreneur to get an NIW. So you might have a plan for a big business that will generate millions of dollars and significant local and state tax revenue and all of that. But if USCIS doesn't believe that the business idea is of national importance, they probably are not going to approve the case anymore. They said that what the business is actually contributing needs to stand on its own, absent any local or regional economic impact. So USCIS is looking for businesses that provide a novel tool or solution, something that US consumers can really, really benefit from, and not just something that is economically impactful. I do think that restaurants and other similar businesses are going to have a much harder time getting an NIW approved under this kind of standard. But people who are forming their startup around a novel tech idea still have very strong entrepreneur NIW cases. One of the most important updates is the removal of a lot of that STEM language from the 2022 update. So they completely removed the language that STEM-related endeavors that have broad implications for the U.S. technology goals can demonstrate national importance. So, a key strategy over the past couple of years has been to show things like the critical and emerging technologies list, the multi-agency priorities memo, and show that U.S. priorities and goals are targeting really aggressive expansion and advancement of particular technological innovations. All of that language is kind of gone now. So it's not enough to point to those kinds of reports. The person or the applicant is now going to need to show that they are making significant contributions commensurate with national importance. It's not going to be assumed, even if they're working in a very important field like AI or semiconductor development, or any of these other things that we've typically been able to show, like, hey, the US has a huge interest in promoting the advancement of these technologies. It's just not enough anymore. And then very disappointingly, the US has removed the US STEM PhD preference language. The 2022 update basically indicated that if you had a US STEM PhD and were continuing to work or advance that field, it was a very strong case for EB-2 NIW. And that language has been removed. So I don't think that a preference is going to be applied moving forward, which is disappointing. That preference really made a lot of sense. US STEM PhDs are some of the highest educated within their field. They are constantly pushing innovation forward in the US. And so the removal of that language was disappointing, but it is no longer there. It also looks like they're removing this note that interested government agencies can provide letters of support, instead saying that now letters of support should come from people who are deeply familiar with the individual's work. And I did find that to be particularly interesting. We do work with cases all the time where our client is placed or is collaborating with or is working with an interested government agency, and that agency is able to provide letters. We actually have a case pending where the RFE response relied a lot on these interested government agency letters. So I'm interested to see where that will go. And then one final thing, USCIS has emphasized that they're not really accepting a labor shortage argument anymore. So they're essentially saying anything that has to do with the labor market or shortages needs to be dealt with at the Department of Labor. The Department of Labor runs PERM, but the Department of Labor also establishes a Schedule A list of occupations that should be exempt from PERM. They never bothered to update that, and so USCIS is essentially saying we can't accept the argument that there is a shortage because the Department of Labor hasn't designated this as a shortage occupation on this specific list. It's an argument that doesn't make any sense because the Department of Labor also publishes many other reports that clearly show a shortage in various occupations. But USCIS has not been amenable to accepting that argument actually for quite a while. So this policy manual update just makes sense with what they've been doing and how they've been handling it. All right, so those were the policy manual update highlights. It seems like there's a lot. It seems like there's a lot that's concrete, but really when reading through it, it's just kind of writing down what some of the RFE trends are right now. And I don't think it makes sweeping changes. I did want to just briefly go over the numbers as well, because there was the Q4 numbers released back in December, and I never went over those. High level, this is what USCIS is dealing with. In the first quarter, so October to December of 2023, they received 14,000 applications for NIW. And then based on the number of approved and denied, the percentage of applications that were approved was about 77%. In the second quarter, they received 16,000 applications, so almost 2,000 more. And it looks like that approval rate was about 76%, so on par. But then April to June 2024, they received 14,000, and the percentage approval rate dropped to pretty significantly by 10 percentage points up from 2023, and the total approval rate was 68%. In the fourth quarter, they received a lot more applications. They got 18,000 applications from July to September, and the approval rate dropped to 61% total. And then they haven't released what they've been seeing from October to December yet in the first quarter of 2025. But I would not be surprised to see a significant uptick in the amount received and, a similar, if not lower, approval rate of about 60%. So, I don't know that this is a full picture. When USCIS releases its statistics and releases information about approval rates, it's not always a one-to-one comparison. So we're calculating this on the number of approved and denied cases, but there's also a whole host of cases that are withdrawn. We don't know if this is really a one-to-one comparison here. So take the approval rates kind of with a grain of salt. Also remember that USCIS released a special report last year on STEM NIW approval rates, and those were much higher than the overall approval rates. I think that does continue to hold true, just to a lesser degree. So when you're seeing approval rates like 61% overall, might be more like 75%, 80% for STEM cases. Back when USCIS released that report, they were saying, I think overall the approval rate was about 70%, but then for STEM cases it was 90% plus. So the numbers don't tell the whole picture. There's not enough data. There's not the right kind of data here to tell the full picture. But there has been a marked drop in approval rates, and that corresponds with a marked increase in the total number that have been received. And then just overall, over the whole fiscal year, USCIS received about 64,000 petitions, and it currently, I shouldn't say currently, as of the end of September of 2024, it had about 44,000 pending, which is a lot pending compared with how many it received over the year. So there are backlogs for sure, and regular processing is taking longer. All right, hopefully that was helpful. Please feel free to ask questions. I will open it up for questions and comments here. I'm happy to answer anything.
So I don't see any questions so far. Was there anything about proposed endeavor and what proposed endeavors may continue to work, or anything about changes to?
No, they kept it very broad. So instead of saying what will work, they took away the guidance about the STEM cases. So they're definitely signaling that they're not really opening it to any specific category. They are trying to apply, I think, a broad stroke brush over all NIW applications. And they're really focusing in on this national importance aspect, regardless of what the field or the type of case is.
Lead asks, what is your estimate on the approval rates for petitions based on exceptional ability?
That is a good question. I haven't seen any data reported for that. And anecdotally, like with the firm, they're pretty much the same as advanced degree cases. Like I haven't noticed a marked difference in exceptional ability cases. I will say, like, exceptional ability is almost always argued in the arts context. And those cases, I think, do have a lower approval rate overall than the STEM-based cases. I think I did see a report from USCIS at some point. It would have been older though, and I think that the rates on exceptional ability cases were lower. I don't remember it being shockingly lower, but just a bit lower overall. That didn't surprise me though, because it corresponds a lot with the arts cases.
Is it going to be that only more traditional PhD cases will be approved from now on?
So I don't think this policy manual update changes anything about the PhD cases. At least when talking about PhD cases, I mean the PhD researcher cases. It does, I think, change things for people who hold a US STEM PhD but who have gone into industry and are not in academic research. So when you're talking about traditional cases, they're still continuing to be viable. There's no real issues there. For the other cases, they're still viable. It's just the shift is now to national importance, and you can't rely on it being in a particular field or in a particular area of US technological development.
Sadishya asks, does the recent changes affect the application that is already filed?
So USCIS would say that nothing in this update is really a change, and I think that's accurate. So all cases already filed are being scrutinized under all of the things that are mentioned in the policy manual update, and that's because that's been the RFE trend now for the past 4, 5, 6 months. So will it affect the ones that are already filed? Yes, but it was already affecting them even before it was published. You may see, though, that USCIS amends its RFE templates and starts quoting directly from the new policy manual. So we will start to see, I think, a few new trends, a few new challenges here and there that are based on this policy manual. But yeah, there's immediate effect. It's not like you can say that your case was adjudicated under one scheme of things, because USCIS policy is not actually supposed to be an update on the law or the standards. It doesn't update the regulations. It's just a signal to the public. It's just alerting the public to how USCIS is already doing things.
Bleed asks, what is deriving these changes at USCIS?
Probably the flood of applications combined with some political changes upcoming. It's fair to some degree. Like, the USCIS set up the PERM program to be the primary program by which employer-sponsored immigration happens, and the NIW is supposed to be an exception to that. And I think that USCIS is now realizing that the signals that it sent have actually signaled to companies that would typically do PERM that now they can do NIW, and that was never really the purpose or the intent. And so the restrictions, I think, are a reaction to everyone seeing NIW as a way to proceed forward, even if they can't do PERM. And USCIS is saying, okay, that's not really the purpose of this program. And then additionally, like I said, the changes happening before the Trump administration comes in are good, because it's sending signals that the administration will approve of, while allowing the program to continue and hopefully staving off any kind of backlash from incoming leadership. So I do think that it's positive overall.
Lingarasu asks, can we still go ahead and apply for advanced degree as part of profile building for NIW?
I'm not sure what this means. Yeah, I'm not sure what it means. Sorry.
Arun asks, should my proposed endeavor focus on a particular industry such as healthcare, banking, or financial services? My work and solutions can be applied across various sectors, and can this be considered of national importance?
So your proposed endeavor needs to explain how you will benefit the U.S. and why that benefit is of national importance. So it's nice if it focuses on a particular industry, but if that's not accurate for your work, you can have it instead focus on something else. So you said your work and solutions can be applied across various sectors. So you would want to focus in on what your solutions entail, like what kind of solutions are they and why is that set of solutions important to the United States.
How does this change the types of profile building that a person needs to do? Would they be the same types of activities but over a longer period?
Generally, yes. Same types of activities are still going to be helpful for the NIW case. The whole point of the kinds of profile building that I recommend for NIW is to give yourself some outlets for contribution outside of your day-to-day work, outside of just your employment. And this policy manual update makes that, I think, even more important. It is going to look, though, for more impact. So having the outlet may not be enough anymore. You may need to show that you are making actual impact on the field or industry through your activities. So through professional association participation, through formal roles with mentor organizations, through public speaking, writing papers, and all of that. If you individually can prove to USCIS that you deserve to immigrate on your own merits, then your case is much, much stronger.
Rakesh asks, as there's been an influx on applications showcasing use of AI, what are your thoughts about AI in healthcare cancer research?
Yeah, it's still a very strong proposed endeavor. You will need to show, though, that your activities, your qualifications, and your background are enabling you to make significant progress towards that proposed endeavor, so that USCIS believes that your activities are on par with something of national importance.
Keyshawn asks, what's the typical way to prove that the candidate will work on the proposed endeavor to USCIS? What have the projects that the company changed during before filing it?
Yeah, so in representing individuals, I rarely recommend that the proposed endeavor be work on specific projects for a company. You should instead explain to USCIS the types of activities you will engage in to advance your proposed endeavor. But projects at the company should be evidence of examples in the past of you making impact of national importance. And then the argument in the proposed endeavor will be that you will continue in such kinds of projects, making similar impact just at a higher level in the future. So it's fine if projects change during, before, or after filing. You just have to make sure that your proposed endeavor is not structured around a particular project that you may leave or the company may restructure or that may end before adjudication.
Adele asks, with the new administration, would industries like solar and green energy be relegated to the background? Like, would it still be of national importance?
This remains to be seen. So we're not entirely sure what the new administration is going to come in and do as far as energy policy. I think they're certainly not going to be as they're not going to place as much emphasis on green energy as the Biden administration. But I think everyone recognizes that energy security, energy independence, energy diversification to enable all of those things is important for the U.S. So I may just shift the way that I'm framing a lot of these cases and focus more on the U.S. protecting itself rather than the U.S. meeting climate goals or other things like that. It's all still very important work, and those cases I think will continue to be viable, but we will have to see how policy priorities are shaped by the new administration.
Utu asks, can you explain on first-hand and independent letters who qualifies as a first-hand recommender?
So USCIS has just said that they want testimonial letters to come from people who are deeply familiar with your work and who can speak to the specifics of your work and why it's of national importance. That's really everything the policy manual update mentioned.
Is working on government grants still a viable way of demonstrating national importance? Also, have there been any changes to the second prong?
I don't want to say no changes to the second prong. My outline right here doesn't match the policy manual exactly. So let me not comment on that. No significant changes to the second prong, other than the emphasis that you continue or that you show that you are able to make progress towards your proposed endeavor. But as far as the first question, is working on government grants still a viable way? Like, not on its own, it's not. But it never really was on its own. It's still a very helpful aspect of the case to point out. You will just need to demonstrate why your personal individual work on the projects that is government funded, why that work rises to the level of national importance. Like, what are you doing that is innovative, unique, and why does the U.S. have a vested interest that you continue that work?
Lead asks, quantifying an impact of an endeavor in terms of direct and indirect job creation can become an art rather than an exact science. Can you shed light on what the expectation will be if that is required?
When talking about job creation, USCIS did put in a comment about business plans being supported by objective evidence. So they may want some statistical analysis done, and then they will probably want those underlying reports to either be referenced in the business plan, or you will have to like show your work to USCIS. USCIS officers, though, they're not trained in statistical analysis. They don't really know, I think, how to look at business plans. So just make sure that whatever you're presenting is reasonable. Like, if you're claiming to create millions of jobs, no one's going to buy that. Like, you can't create millions of jobs in 2 years. It's just not going to work. If you say you're going to only create 10 jobs in 3 years, but then make a claim to a lot of indirect jobs, USCIS might not know how to look at that analysis about indirect jobs, so they might only attribute the 10 jobs to you. So I think you're right about it being an art rather than a science. You need to give them enough information that they can be assured that the numbers you're working with are solid and the methods you are using are solid, but they also need to understand it, and it needs to make reasonable sense to them.
So I don't see any other questions. Anything else you want to cover, Amber?
Nope, I think that's all for today. Thank you all so much for joining.
Thanks, everyone.